The cold steel of the auction block bit into Abigail Zander's bare feet as she stood trembling before the leering crowd of men. It was 1871 in Springerville, Arizona Territory, and at 19 years of age, she had never imagined her own father would sell her like cattle to settle his gambling debts. $500 for this fine young woman, the auctioneer bellowed, his voice carrying across the dusty town square. Look at her, gentlemen, healthy, strong, and easy on the eyes, too. The crowd of miners, merchants, and ranchers hooted appreciatively as Abigail tried to shrink into herself, the thin cotton dress her only shield against their hungry stares. Her father stood off to the side, already counting the money he hadn't yet received, his bloodshot eyes never meeting hers. The debt to Elijah Blackstone, the territory's most notorious saloon owner, had finally come due, and Thaddeus Zander had decided his daughter was worth more than his honor. 550, called a portly man with tobacco-stained teeth. 600, countered another, a silver miner whose reputation for cruelty preceded him. Tears streamed down Abigail's face as the bidding continued. She'd been raised proper by her mother before consumption had taken her 3 winters past. Now there was no one to protect her, no one to stand between her and whatever fate awaited at the hands of these men. $750. The new voice cut through the commotion like a knife. The crowd parted, revealing a tall figure silhouetted against the setting sun. The stranger stepped forward, and Abigail saw him clearly for the first time. He was lean and weather-beaten, with intelligent green eyes that assessed the situation with cold calculation. Dust clung to his long coat, and a wide-brimmed hat shadowed much of his face, but she could tell he was younger than most of the other bidders, perhaps in his mid-20s. 800, countered Blackstone himself, the man to whom her father owed the debt. His intentions for Abigail, should he win, were written plainly across his cruel face. $1,000. The stranger's voice remained even, unhurried. A murmur rippled through the crowd. No one had ever paid such a sum for a bride in Springerville, even one as comely as Abigail. 1,000 going once. The auctioneer could barely contain his excitement. Going twice. Blackstone's face contorted with rage, but even his wealth had limits. You'll regret this, Cowboy, he spat. Sold. To the gentleman in the hat for $1,000. The crowd dispersed, grumbling and casting dark glances at the stranger who had outbid them all. Abigail remained frozen on the platform as her father hurried to collect the payment, not sparing her a single glance. The stranger approached, counting out crisp bills into the auctioneer's outstretched hand. Once the transaction was complete, he turned to Abigail and extended his hand. "My name is Vaughn Adler," he said quietly. "And you're free to go, miss." Abigail stared at him in confusion. "What do you mean?" "I mean I didn't buy you to own you. No person has the right to own another." His voice was low, meant only for her ears. "Take this." He pressed $200 into her palm. "It should be enough to get you to California or back east, wherever you want to go." Before she could respond, a gunshot cracked through the air. Vaughn spun around, hand instantly moving to the revolver at his hip. Thaddeus Zander lay sprawled in the dirt, blood blossoming across his chest. Above him stood Blackstone, smoking pistol still pointed where her father had stood. "If I can't have the girl," Blackstone shouted, "then I'll take my payment in blood." Vaughn pushed Abigail behind him as Blackstone swung the gun in their direction. "Run," he ordered her. But Abigail's feet seemed rooted to the spot as she watched her father's life drain away into the dusty street. For all his failings, all his cruelties, he was still her father, and something inside her broke at the sight. Another shot rang out, and Vaughn returned fire. Blackstone dropped with a bullet in his shoulder, cursing wildly as his men rushed to his aid. "We need to go. Now." Vaughn grabbed Abigail's arm and pulled her toward a chestnut mare tethered nearby. With practiced ease, he lifted her into the saddle and swung up behind her. With a sharp whistle, he spurred the horse forward, and they galloped out of Springerville as bullets kicked up dust at their heels. The desert landscape blurred around them as Abigail clung to the saddle horn. Her mind reeled from the rapid succession of events being sold, her father's murder, and now her flight with this mysterious stranger who had spent a fortune only to set her free. They rode hard until the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the vast Arizona sky in streaks of orange and purple. Only when the lights of Springerville had long disappeared did Vaughn slow their pace, guiding the horse toward a small outcropping of rocks near a trickle of a stream. "We'll rest here for the night," he said, dismounting and helping Abigail down. Her legs nearly buckled beneath her, unused to such riding. "Why?" she finally managed to ask as Vaughn busied himself gathering wood for a fire. "Why would you spend so much money just to free me?" Vaughn paused, striking a match that illuminated his face in the growing darkness. "Because I've seen what happens to women sold like that," he said simply. "And I couldn't stand by and watch it happen again." As the small fire took hold, casting dancing shadows across their makeshift camp, Abigail studied her rescuer. In the flickering light, she could see a scar that ran from his right temple down to his jaw, a reminder of some past violence. His hands were calloused but gentle as he offered her a canteen of water. "Thank you," she whispered, suddenly aware of how parched she was. "You should sleep," he advised. "Tomorrow you can decide where you want to go." "I have nowhere to go," Abigail admitted. "My father was all I had left." "I'm sorry about your father," Vaughn said, though there was a hardness to his voice that suggested he wasn't entirely sympathetic. "No man should sell his daughter, no matter his debts." Abigail looked away, shame burning her cheeks. "He wasn't always like that. After my mother died, something changed in him. The drinking got worse and the gambling." She trailed off, realizing she was defending a man who had been willing to sell her to the highest bidder. "You don't owe me your story," Vaughn said, settling his bedroll on the opposite side of the fire. "Get some rest. We've got a long ride ahead tomorrow." As exhaustion claimed her, Abigail's last conscious thought was that despite everything that had happened, she felt safer with this stranger than she had in her own home for years. Dawn broke with the soft cooing of mourning doves. Abigail awoke to find Vaughn already up, brewing coffee over a rekindled fire. The scent made her stomach growl, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since the previous morning. "There's jerky in my saddlebag," Vaughn said, noticing her discomfort. "Help yourself." As they shared this simple breakfast, Abigail found her voice again. "Where are we going?" Vaughn poured coffee into a tin cup and handed it to her. "That depends on you. I meant what I said. You're free. I can take you to Tucson where you can catch a stage east or north to Flagstaff." "And what about you? Where are you headed?" A shadow passed over his face. "I've got business up north. There's a ranch near Flagstaff I've had my eye on for some time." He hesitated, then added, "Blackstone's men won't give up easily. He's not the type to forget a grudge, especially not one that cost him $1,000 and a bullet in the shoulder." The reality of her situation settled heavily on Abigail's shoulders. She was alone in the world now, with nothing but the clothes on her back and the money Vaughn had given her. The thought of setting off by herself terrified her. Could I stay with you? Just until I figure out what to do next?" The request tumbled from her lips before she could think better of it. Vaughn's expression remained unreadable as he studied her across the fire. "It wouldn't be proper," he finally said. "And my life isn't exactly settled." "I won't be a burden," Abigail promised. "I can cook and clean and I'm good with numbers. I kept all my father's books before." She stopped, unwilling to revisit yesterday's horrors. "It's not about being a burden," Vaughn said, his voice softening slightly. "It's about your reputation. A young woman traveling alone with a man she barely knows. People talk. My reputation." A bitter laugh escaped her. "I was sold at auction yesterday, Mr. Adler. I think my reputation is the least of my concerns." To her surprise, a small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Fair point," he conceded. "All right, you can come with me to Flagstaff, but only until you decide on a more permanent arrangement." Relief washed over Abigail. "Thank you. I won't forget this kindness." They packed up camp quickly, Vaughn teaching Abigail how to properly saddle the horse, a skill her father had never bothered to impart. As they rode north, with Abigail seated behind Vaughn this time, he told her about the ranch he hoped to purchase. "It's not much, 100 acres with a small house and barn, but the land is good with a year-round creek running through it. Previous owner died without heirs, and the bank's been sitting on it for almost a year." "Why that particular ranch?" Abigail asked, curious about the man who had saved her. Vaughn was quiet for so long that Abigail thought he might not answer. "I worked there as a boy," he finally said. "The owner, Old Man Jenkins, taught me everything I know about ranching. He was a better father to me than my own ever was." The personal revelation surprised her. "What happened to him?" "Influenza took him winter before last. I was away driving cattle to California. By the time I returned, he was gone and the bank had taken the ranch." There was old grief in his voice, tempered by time but still present. "I'm sorry," Abigail said softly. They rode in companionable silence after that, stopping only briefly to rest the horse and eat a meager lunch of jerky and hard biscuits. The landscape gradually changed as they traveled north, the barren desert giving way to rolling grasslands dotted with juniper and pine. As the sun began to set on their second day of travel, Vaughn guided the horse off the trail toward a small grove of cottonwoods. "There's a spring here," he explained. "We'll camp for the night." The spring bubbled up from between moss-covered rocks, forming a small pool before trickling away down the hillside. Abigail knelt beside it gratefully, washing the dust from her face and hands while Vaughn tended to the horse. "How much farther to Flagstaff?" she asked as they set up camp. "Another 2 days' ride," Vaughn replied, gathering wood for a fire. "We're making good time." As darkness fell and stars appeared in the clear sky above, Abigail found herself studying Vaughn in the firelight. There was a quietness to him that she found comforting. He didn't feel the need to fill silence with empty words like many men did. But there was also a wariness, as though he was constantly anticipating danger. "Have you always been a rancher?" she asked. Vaughn looked up from the fire. "Not always, no. I rode with the cavalry during the war. Afterward, I drove cattle, worked as a ranch hand, did some scouting for the army." He poked at the fire with a stick. "What about you? What did you do before?" "Before I was put up for auction," Abigail finished when he trailed off. "I kept house for my father after my mother died. Before that, I helped at the general store in Springerville." She hesitated, then admitted, "I always wanted to be a teacher. My mother taught me to read and write, and I thought maybe someday." "Why didn't you?" Abigail shrugged. "Father didn't see the point in educating girls beyond basic reading and figures. Said it would give me ideas above my station." The old resentment colored her voice. "After Mother died, there was no money for books anyway. All of it went to whiskey and cards." Vaughn nodded thoughtfully. "It's not too late, you know, to be a teacher." The simple statement, delivered without judgment or condescension, touched something deep within Abigail. For the first time since her mother's death, someone believed in possibilities for her. Maybe, she said softly, unwilling to hope too much. As they settled in for the night, Abigail lying on Vaughn's bedroll while he sat propped against a tree with his rifle across his lap, she realized she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: safety. The third day of their journey dawned clear and cool. Abigail woke to find Vaughn already up and about, returning from the spring with a string of small trout. "You've been busy," she remarked, impressed. "Thought we could use a proper breakfast," he replied, setting about cleaning the fish with practiced efficiency. As they ate the freshly cooked trout, Abigail noticed Vaughn repeatedly scanning their surroundings, his eyes narrowed against the morning light. "Are you expecting trouble?" she asked. Vaughn set down his tin plate. "Just being cautious. We've been lucky so far, but Blackstone isn't known for giving up easily." "You think he followed us?" "It's possible. We left a clear enough trail." He stood, brushing off his hands. "We should get moving." They packed up quickly and continued their journey northward. The terrain grew increasingly rugged as they climbed in elevation, the horse picking its way carefully along the trail. By midday, they could see mountains in the distance, their peaks still capped with snow despite the late spring season. It was near dusk when Vaughn suddenly reined in the horse, his body tensing. Abigail followed his gaze to a ridge about half a mile back where 3 riders had appeared, silhouetted against the sky. "Blackstone's men," she whispered, fear clutching at her throat. "Looks like it," Vaughn muttered. "Hold on tight." He urged the horse into a gallop, and they raced across the open grassland toward a line of trees marking a creek bed. Behind them, shouts carried on the wind as their pursuers gave chase. "They're gaining on us," Abigail cried, looking back to see the riders drawing closer, their horses fresh compared to Vaughn's tired mount. "We can't outrun them," Vaughn said grimly. "We need to find a place to make a stand." They plunged into the trees, following the creek upstream until they reached a small box canyon with steep walls rising on 3 sides. Vaughn dismounted quickly and helped Abigail down. "Take the horse and hide behind those rocks," he instructed, gesturing to a jumble of boulders at the back of the canyon. "Whatever happens, stay down and out of sight." Abigail grabbed his arm as he checked the loads in his revolver. "There are 3 of them." "I've faced worse odds," he said, his expression hardening. "Go. Now." Heart pounding, Abigail led the horse behind the rocks and crouched low, peering through a gap as Vaughn took position behind a fallen tree at the mouth of the canyon. The sound of approaching hoofbeats echoed off the canyon walls. 3 riders appeared at the entrance, drawing their horses to a halt when they spotted Vaughn's position. Abigail recognized one of them as Blackstone's right-hand man, a brutal enforcer named Curtis. "That's far enough," Vaughn called out. "Turn around and ride away while you still can." Curtis laughed, a harsh sound that sent shivers down Abigail's spine. "You've got something that belongs to Mr. Blackstone, Cowboy. The girl. Hand her over and maybe we'll let you live." "She doesn't belong to anyone," Vaughn replied. "And I'm not asking again. Ride away." Instead of responding, Curtis nodded to his companions. One of them raised a rifle and fired, the bullet splintering wood inches from Vaughn's head. He returned fire immediately, and the man tumbled from his saddle with a cry of pain. What followed was a chaotic exchange of gunfire that seemed to last an eternity. Abigail watched in horror as bullets kicked up dirt around Vaughn's position. When he was forced to reload, Curtis and the remaining rider charged forward. Vaughn managed to fire again, hitting the second man in the chest, but Curtis reached the fallen tree. The 2 men grappled fiercely, rolling in the dirt as they each fought for control of their weapons. Curtis was heavier, using his weight to pin Vaughn down. Abigail saw a knife flash in the fading light as Curtis raised it high, ready to plunge it into Vaughn's throat. Without thinking, Abigail grabbed a rock and rushed forward, striking Curtis on the back of the head with all her might. The enforcer slumped sideways, momentarily stunned. It was all the opening Vaughn needed. In one swift movement, he drew a knife from his boot and drove it upward. Curtis made a terrible gurgling sound, then collapsed. The canyon fell silent except for Vaughn's ragged breathing as he pushed the dead man off him. "Are you hurt?" Abigail asked, kneeling beside him, her hands shaking. Vaughn sat up slowly, wincing. "Just a few bruises." He looked at her with newfound respect. "That was brave, foolish, but brave." "I couldn't just watch him kill you," she said simply. Vaughn nodded, then glanced at the bodies scattered around the canyon entrance. "We need to move. There might be more of them." They rode through the night, pushing the exhausted horse as much as they dared. By dawn, they had put considerable distance between themselves and the scene of the confrontation. As the first light of day spread across the eastern sky, they emerged from a forest of ponderosa pines to see a small settlement nestled in a valley below. "Flagstaff," Vaughn announced, relief evident in his voice. Abigail sagged against his back, fatigue washing over her. The events of the past few days felt like a terrible dream: her father's death, her flight from Springerville, the gunfight in the canyon. Yet through it all, this man who was still largely a stranger had protected her, risked his life for her. They rode into town just as businesses were opening for the day. Flagstaff was larger than Springerville, with a proper main street lined with storefronts and a railroad depot at the far end. People glanced curiously at them as they passed a dusty, trail-worn man and a disheveled woman riding double on a tired horse. Vaughn guided them to a modest hotel near the center of town. "Wait here," he said, helping Abigail dismount before tying the horse to a hitching post. He returned moments later with a key. "I've got us rooms. They've got hot baths, too." He handed her a small purse of coins. "Get yourself whatever you need. There's a general store across the street." Abigail clutched the purse, overwhelmed by his continuing generosity. "I don't know how to thank you." "No need," Vaughn said, his usual terseness returning now that they were in civilization. "Take your time. I need to see the banker about the ranch. I'll meet you back here for supper." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Abigail standing in front of the hotel, feeling strangely bereft despite the promise of a bath and clean clothes. The hotel room was small but clean, with a real bed that looked like heaven after nights spent on the hard ground. A copper tub stood in one corner, and soon a pair of young maids arrived with buckets of steaming water. Abigail sank into the bath with a sigh of pleasure, letting the hot water soothe her aching muscles and wash away the dust of the trail. As she soaked, she thought about her situation. The money Vaughn had given her would last a while if she was careful, but what then? She had no family, no home to return to. After her bath, dressed in the simple but clean dress she had purchased at the general store, Abigail wandered to the hotel's small dining room. Vaughn was already there, seated at a table by the window. He had cleaned up as well, his dark hair still damp from washing, wearing a fresh shirt that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. He stood when he saw her approach, an automatic gesture of courtesy that surprised her given his rough exterior. "You look rested," he said awkwardly. "Thank you. A bath works wonders." Abigail sat across from him, suddenly shy in these more civilized surroundings. Out on the trail, their unusual circumstances had created a kind of intimacy. But here in town, the conventions of society reasserted themselves. They ordered supper, real food after days of jerky and hardtack, and Abigail savored every bite of the hearty beef stew and fresh bread. "How did your meeting with the banker go?" she asked as they ate. A rare smile crossed Vaughn's face. "Better than expected. The ranch is still available and my offer was accepted. I can take possession as soon as the paperwork is finalized, probably within the week." "That's wonderful news," Abigail said sincerely. "I'm happy for you." "There's something else," Vaughn said, his expression growing serious. "I asked around about Blackstone. Seems he's laid up with that shoulder wound, but he's offering a reward for information about us, $500. Abigail's appetite vanished. "So we're not safe even here." "We're safer than we were. Blackstone has influence in Apache County, but less so up here in Coconino." Vaughn leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Still, it might be best if you considered moving on. San Francisco, perhaps, or even Denver." The thought of leaving, of never seeing Vaughn again, created an unexpected hollow feeling in Abigail's chest. In just a few days, this quiet, honorable man had become important to her in ways she couldn't fully articulate. "What about you?" she asked. "Won't Blackstone come after you too?" Vaughn shrugged. "I can handle myself. Besides, once I'm established at the ranch, I'll have neighbors, connections. It's different for a man." The unfairness of it stung, but Abigail knew he was right. A woman alone had few protections in this world, especially one with no family or husband. "I should go," she said reluctantly, "but I don't know where." Vaughn hesitated, then said, "There's a school in Flagstaff. They're looking for a teacher's assistant. The position doesn't pay much, but it includes room and board at the schoolmistress's house." He produced a folded newspaper clipping from his pocket and slid it across the table. "I thought of what you said, about wanting to be a teacher." Abigail stared at the advertisement, then at Vaughn, touched beyond words that he had remembered her dream and taken steps to help her realize it. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll at least consider it," Vaughn replied. "Miss Holloway, the schoolmistress, is expecting you tomorrow morning if you're interested." That night, alone in her hotel room, Abigail stood by the window looking out at the lamplit streets of Flagstaff. So much had changed in just a few days. She had lost her father, her home, everything familiar. Yet somehow she felt more hopeful than she had in years. The teacher's assistant position offered a path to the future she had once dreamed of. It was sensible, respectable, safe. So why did the thought of accepting it fill her with a sense of loss? The answer came to her with startling clarity. Because it would mean saying goodbye to Vaughn Adler. Despite the brevity of their acquaintance, despite the danger and hardship that had defined it, she had developed feelings for the quiet cowboy who had saved her. Abigail slept fitfully, her dreams filled with gunshots and her father's face, twisted in death. She woke before dawn, her decision made. After dressing in her new clothes and arranging her hair as neatly as possible, she made her way downstairs. To her surprise, Vaughn was already in the hotel lobby, hat in hand. "I thought I'd walk you to your appointment with Miss Holloway," he offered. Abigail took a deep breath. "I'm not going." Vaughn's eyebrows rose. "You're not interested in the position. It's not that." She twisted her hands nervously. "I've been thinking about what you said about the ranch. You mentioned it needed work, repairs to the house, fences to mend, that sort of thing." "That's true," Vaughn said cautiously. "I'm good with my hands," Abigail continued, the words coming faster now. "I can cook and clean and garden. I even helped my father with carpentry before things changed." She met his eyes directly. "I could help you get the ranch in order, as payment for saving my life." Vaughn's expression was unreadable. "It wouldn't be proper, Abigail. A young woman living alone with a man she's not married to. We could say I'm your sister," she suggested. "Or a cousin. No one here knows us." He shook his head. "It's a small community." "People would talk, and your reputation, my reputation," Abigail interrupted, frustration giving her courage. "You keep talking about my reputation as if it's the most important thing. But what good is a spotless reputation if I'm miserable, if I'm alone?" "You'd be safer in town," Vaughn insisted, though she noticed his resolve seemed to be weakening. "Safer, with Blackstone offering a reward for me. At least at the ranch I'd be away from prying eyes." She stepped closer to him. "Please, Vaughn, give me a chance to prove my worth. If it doesn't work out, I'll take the teaching position later." Vaughn was quiet for a long moment, studying her face as if searching for something. Finally, he sighed. "2 weeks," he said. "You can stay at the ranch for 2 weeks and then we'll reassess." Relief flooded through Abigail. "Thank you. You won't regret it." "I already do," Vaughn muttered, but there was a hint of a smile in his eyes. 3 days later, with the deed to the Jenkins Ranch officially in Vaughn's name, they loaded their modest supplies into a wagon he had purchased and set out from Flagstaff. The ranch lay 15 miles northeast of town, nestled in a valley with the San Francisco peaks rising majestically to the west. As they crested a ridge, Vaughn reined in the horses and pointed. "There it is." Below them spread 100 acres of good grazing land, bisected by a clear stream. A small house with a porch stood near a cluster of cottonwoods, with a barn and corral nearby. The buildings showed signs of neglect. The house needed a new roof in places, and parts of the corral fence had collapsed, but even from a distance, Abigail could see the property's potential. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "It will be," Vaughn agreed, a rare note of enthusiasm in his voice. "Jenkins always said this land had good bones." They drove down to the house, the wagon wheels leaving tracks in grass that had grown unchecked during the property's abandonment. Up close, the house revealed more of its condition: weathered clapboards, a sagging porch step, windows filmed with dust and cobwebs. But the structure itself was sound, built with care by someone who knew their craft. Inside was much the same. A layer of dust covered everything, and mice had clearly made themselves at home during the vacancy. But the furnishings remained: a sturdy oak table with chairs, a cast iron cookstove, a rocking chair by the stone fireplace. 2 small bedrooms opened off the main room, one clearly the master and the other barely large enough for a narrow bed. "It's not much," Vaughn said, watching Abigail's reaction closely. She ran a finger along the mantelpiece, leaving a clean streak in the dust. "It's a home," she replied. "Or it will be, with some work." They spent that first day cleaning the house enough to make it habitable, airing out musty bedding and sweeping away the most obvious dirt. By nightfall, they had a fire burning in the hearth and a simple supper cooking on the stove. As they ate by lamplight, Abigail felt a sense of contentment stealing over her despite the primitive conditions. This small house, isolated though it was, already felt more like home than the place in Springerville ever had after her mother's death. "Tomorrow we should start on the roof," Vaughn said, breaking into her thoughts. "Before the summer rains come." "I can help," Abigail offered eagerly. Vaughn shook his head. "The roof's my job, but the garden could use clearing if you're of a mind to grow vegetables." And so began their routine. Each day they rose with the sun and worked until dusk, stopping only for brief meals. Vaughn tackled the heavy repairs: the roof, the broken corral fences, the barn door that hung askew on its hinges. Abigail cleaned the house from top to bottom, beat the dust from rugs and bedding, and set about reclaiming the small kitchen garden that had once thrived beside the house. They worked separately for the most part, but Abigail was always aware of Vaughn's presence: the sound of his hammer on the roof, the low murmur of his voice as he talked to the horses. At night, exhausted from the day's labors, they would share a simple meal and sit on the porch watching the stars appear. exchanging few words but finding comfort in each other's company. A week passed in this manner, and Abigail found herself dreading the approach of the 2-week deadline Vaughn had set. The ranch was beginning to feel like home, and the thought of leaving for a position in town grew less appealing by the day. It wasn't just the ranch she would miss, she admitted to herself as she weeded the garden one morning. It was Vaughn himself, his quiet strength, his unwavering integrity, the rare but transformative smile that appeared when he was pleased with a day's work. She had just straightened up, wiping sweat from her brow, when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Vaughn had ridden into Flagstaff for supplies, but he wasn't due back until evening. Alarmed, Abigail retreated to the house, remembering Blackstone's reward for information about her whereabouts. From the window, she watched as a wagon came into view, driven by an elderly man with a white beard. Beside him sat a plump woman of similar age, her gray hair tucked beneath a sunbonnet. They pulled up in front of the house and the man called out, "Hello, the house." Cautiously, Abigail opened the door. "Can I help you?" the woman beamed. "You must be Miss Zander. We're the Hendersons, Marjorie and Thomas. We have the next ranch over about 3 miles east." "We heard Vaughn Adler had bought old Jenkins's place," Thomas added. "Thought we'd come by and welcome our new neighbors." Relief washed over Abigail. "It's nice to meet you," she said, stepping onto the porch. "Vaughn's gone into town for supplies, but he should be back later." "Oh, we can't stay that long," Marjorie said, climbing down from the wagon with her husband's help. "But I've brought some sourdough starter and preserves. Every new home needs proper provisions." As Abigail accepted the gifts, Marjorie's eyes swept over her with frank curiosity. Vaughn didn't mention he was married. Heat rose in Abigail's cheeks. "Oh, we're not, that is, I'm just helping him get the ranch in order. I'm his." She faltered, suddenly unsure what to call herself. "His intended," Marjorie finished for her, nodding as if this explained everything. "Well, that's proper enough. A man shouldn't live alone out here, especially not one as handsome as your Vaughn." "He's not Abigail began, but Thomas was already speaking. Jenkins would be pleased to see his place in good hands. He thought highly of young Adler." He glanced around the yard approvingly. "Looks like you two have been working hard." Abigail gave up trying to correct their assumption and invited the Hendersons in for coffee. As they chatted, she learned more about the local community. The nearest church was in Flagstaff, but services were sometimes held in homes during bad weather. There was talk of building a schoolhouse closer to the outlying ranches. The Hendersons' son ran the general store in town and could deliver orders if given advance notice. "And you must come to our place for supper soon," Marjorie insisted as they prepared to leave. "It does my heart good to see young people settling here. Too many moving west to California these days." After they had gone, Abigail sat on the porch steps, turning over the Hendersons' visit in her mind. They had assumed she and Vaughn were engaged, and she hadn't corrected them effectively. What would Vaughn say when he learned of this misunderstanding? The sun was setting when she finally heard the wagon returning. Vaughn looked tired but satisfied as he pulled up in front of the house, the wagon bed loaded with lumber, seed for planting, and other supplies. "You've been busy," Abigail remarked, helping him unload. "Got a good price on the lumber," Vaughn replied. "Thought I might build a proper chicken coop next week." Abigail hesitated, then said, "We had visitors today, the Hendersons from the next ranch over." Vaughn paused in lifting a sack of flour. "Thomas and Marjorie, they're good people." "Yes, they seemed very kind." Abigail busied herself with folding the tarp from the wagon. They thought we were engaged." There was a moment of silence, and when Abigail dared to look up, she found Vaughn watching her with an unreadable expression. "What did you tell them?" he asked finally. I tried to explain, but they seemed so certain, and then they started talking about how pleased Jenkins would be that you had the ranch, and she trailed off, embarrassed. I'm sorry. I should have been clearer with them. To her surprise, Vaughn didn't seem angry. It's probably simpler this way, he said after a moment. People understand a man and his intended living on a ranch together. It gives them a story that makes sense. So you're not upset, Vaughn shrugged. No point in it. Besides, it's only for another week until you decide about the teaching position. The reminder of their agreement fell between them like a stone. Abigail turned away, not wanting him to see the disappointment on her face. I'll start supper, she said quietly, heading for the house. That night, as they ate in relative silence, Abigail found herself studying Vaughn when he wasn't looking. The past week had changed him subtly. He seemed more relaxed, the habitual wariness in his eyes softening. The ranch was good for him, she realized. It gave him purpose, a place to belong. Just as it had for her. Vaughn, she began, setting down her fork, I've been thinking about our arrangement. He looked up, his expression guarded. Oh, I don't want to go to town, she said simply. I want to stay here at the ranch. Vaughn's face gave nothing away. Because you're afraid of Blackstone. No. Abigail took a deep breath. Because I'm happy here, I like the work, I like the land, and I think I could be of real help to you. Abigail, just listen, please, she interrupted. I know it's not conventional. I know people will talk no matter what we tell them about our relationship, but I don't care about that anymore. She met his gaze directly. Unless you want me to go. For a long moment, Vaughn was silent, his green eyes searching her face. Then he said quietly, I don't want you to go. Something fluttered in Abigail's chest, hope, or perhaps something deeper. Then I'll stay, she said. Vaughn nodded slowly. As my intended according to the Hendersons. Yes. Abigail felt a blush creeping up her neck. If that's agreeable to you. It's agreeable, Vaughn said, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. And so Abigail stayed, the 2-week deadline passing without further discussion. Spring gave way to early summer, and the ranch flourished under their combined efforts. The house was clean and weathertight, the garden producing the first tender vegetables, the chicken coop completed and occupied by a half-dozen hens purchased from a neighboring ranch. Their days fell into a pleasant rhythm. Mornings were for the hardest work, before the sun grew too hot. Afternoons might find Vaughn mending tack or splitting firewood, while Abigail preserved the garden's bounty, or worked on the quilt she was piecing together from fabric remnants. Evenings were for quiet companionship on the porch, watching the sunset paint the distant peaks in gold and crimson. They maintained separate bedrooms, Vaughn insisting on propriety despite the fiction of their engagement. But something was changing between them, a growing ease, a deepening connection that went beyond their shared labor. Abigail noticed how Vaughn's eyes would follow her as she moved about the house, how his hand would linger when he helped her down from the wagon. For her part, she found herself watching for his smile, finding excuses to be near him, treasuring the rare moments when he would share stories of his past. It was during one such evening, as they sat on the porch after supper, that Vaughn finally told her the full story of his connection to the Jenkins ranch. My mother died when I was 8, he began, his voice low and measured. My father took to drinking after that, much like yours did. One night when I was 12, he beat me so badly I couldn't get up off the floor. The next morning he was gone, rode out without a word, and never came back. Abigail's heart ached for the boy he had been. What did you do? I walked, Vaughn said simply. Didn't know where I was going, just knew I couldn't stay in that empty cabin. Must have walked 15 miles before I collapsed right there. He pointed to the stream that ran through their property. Jenkins found me, half dead from exhaustion and hunger. brought me here, nursed me back to health, and then offered me a job. He sounds like a good man, Abigail said softly. Vaughn nodded, his eyes on the darkening sky. The best I've ever known. Taught me everything: how to work cattle, how to build, how to be a man of honor. He paused. When I was 18, I wanted to see more of the world, so I joined the cavalry. Jenkins understood, said the ranch would be here when I was ready to come home. But when you came back, he was gone, Abigail finished for him. Yes. I tried to buy the ranch from the bank then, but they wanted more than I had, so I went back to driving cattle, saving every penny. A smile touched his lips. And then I spent most of it buying you at auction. Abigail's breath caught. Do you regret it? Vaughn turned to look at her, his expression softer than she had ever seen it. Not for a single moment. The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken feelings. Abigail was acutely aware of his proximity, of the warmth of his body in the cool evening air. Vaughn, she whispered, not entirely sure what she wanted to say. Before she could continue, the sound of approaching riders broke the spell. Vaughn was on his feet instantly, hand moving to the revolver he still wore habitually. "Stay here," he ordered, stepping off the porch into the gathering dusk. 3 riders emerged from the trees lining the drive, and Abigail's heart froze when she recognized the man in the lead, Elijah Blackstone himself, his right arm still in a sling from Vaughn's bullet. "Adler," Blackstone called, reining in his horse a cautious distance from the house. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Vaughn's stance was relaxed but alert, his hand resting near his weapon. "Nothing here belongs to you, Blackstone." "The girl," Blackstone spat. "Her father owed me money and she was the collateral. You stole her." "I bought her fair and square," Vaughn replied evenly. "And then I set her free because people aren't property. Now I suggest you leave my land before you get hurt." Blackstone's face contorted with rage. "You think I won't find you? I've got men all over the territory. There's nowhere you can hide her." "I'm not hiding," Abigail called, stepping off the porch to stand beside Vaughn despite his warning look. "And I'm not afraid of you." "You should be, girl," Blackstone said, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "Your father died for crossing me. You and your cowboy here will meet the same fate if you don't come with me now." "That's not going to happen," Vaughn said, his hand now resting openly on his revolver. "This is your last warning, Blackstone. Ride away." For a tense moment, it seemed Blackstone might order his men to attack. Then, surprisingly, he laughed a cold, mirthless sound. "You're a dead man walking, Adler. Both of you are." He jerked his reins, turning his horse. "Enjoy what little time you have left." They watched in silence as Blackstone and his men rode away, disappearing into the trees. Only when they were out of sight did Abigail realize she was trembling. "He found us," she whispered. "How did he find us?" Vaughn's jaw was set in a hard line. "Someone in town must have talked. That reward money would be tempting for a lot of folks." He turned to her, his expression grave. "You should pack your things." Abigail stared at him. "What? Why?" "It's not safe for you here anymore," Vaughn said. "I can take you to Flagstaff tonight, put you on the first train east in the morning." "No." The vehemence of her response seemed to surprise them both. "I'm not running, Vaughn. This is my home now." "Abigail, be reasonable." "I am being reasonable," she insisted. "If I leave, what then?" "Spend my life looking over my shoulder, wondering if Blackstone's men have found me. Never having a real home because I'm always ready to flee at the first sign of danger." She shook her head firmly. "No, I won't live like that." Vaughn ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "He'll come back, and next time he won't just talk. Then we'll be ready for him," Abigail said with more confidence than she felt. "Together." The look Vaughn gave her was equal parts admiration and exasperation. "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met." Is that a compliment?" A reluctant smile tugged at his lips. "Maybe." That night, they took precautions checking the locks on doors and windows, keeping a loaded rifle within reach. Vaughn insisted on sleeping in the main room, positioned to hear any approach from outside. Abigail lay awake in her bed, listening to the normal sounds of the house and the occasional creak of the floorboards as Vaughn moved about, keeping watch. Despite the danger that loomed over them, she felt strangely at peace with her decision to stay. This ranch, this life with Vaughn, it was worth fighting for. The next morning, they rode into Flagstaff together, Abigail refusing to be left behind at the ranch alone. Their first stop was the sheriff's office, where Vaughn recounted Blackstone's threats and asked about the law's position. Sheriff Wilson, a weathered man with a silver mustache, listened with a frown. "Blackstone's a troublemaker, no doubt about it, but threats aren't enough for me to arrest him, especially since he left when you told him to. So we have to wait until he actually tries to kill us." Vaughn asked, his voice tight with frustration. The sheriff sighed. "I can send a deputy out to check on you every few days, but my jurisdiction is limited. Most of what happens outside town boundaries is territorial business." He regarded them thoughtfully. "Have you considered just giving him what he wants? Pay him the debt the girl's father owed?" "That's not an option," Vaughn said flatly. "Then my advice is to stay alert and be prepared to defend yourselves if necessary." The sheriff's expression softened slightly. "For what it's worth, I think what you did was right, Adler. No man should be able to buy and sell another human being, debt or no debt." As they left the sheriff's office, Abigail could see the tension in Vaughn's shoulders. "It's not your fault," she said quietly. "You couldn't have known Blackstone would be so persistent." "I should have," Vaughn replied grimly. "Men like him don't let go of grudges easily. I've seen it before." They completed their errands in town, quickly purchasing extra ammunition, basic supplies, and at Vaughn's insistence, a small revolver that Abigail could handle. "I'll teach you to shoot," he told her as they rode back to the ranch. "Just in case." The next few weeks passed in a state of watchful tension. Vaughn taught Abigail how to use the revolver, making her practice until she could hit a can placed on a fence post at 20 paces. They established routines designed to minimize their vulnerability, never working alone far from the house, taking turns keeping watch during the night, always having weapons within reach. Despite these precautions, life at the ranch continued. The garden flourished, providing fresh vegetables for their table. Vaughn acquired a small herd of cattle, the first step in his plan to build a successful ranching operation. Abigail learned to ride properly, no longer clinging fearfully to Vaughn's back but sitting tall in her own saddle as they checked fence lines or moved the herd to fresh pasture. And through it all, their connection deepened. The pretense of their engagement, maintained for the benefit of neighbors like the Hendersons, began to feel less like a convenient fiction and more like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. It was on a warm July evening as they sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk that Vaughn finally gave voice to what had been growing between them. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant, "about us. About this arrangement we have." Abigail's heart quickened. "Oh," Vaughn turned to face her, his expression serious but tender. "When I bought you at that auction, I never imagined." He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "I never imagined I'd find someone who would make this place feel like home again." "Vaughn, let me finish," he said gently. "I know our situation is unusual. I know we've been pretending to be engaged for the sake of appearances. But the truth is, Abigail, I don't want to pretend anymore." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object that caught the last rays of the setting sun, a ring, simple but elegant, a band of gold with a small pearl set in the center. "It was my mother's," Vaughn explained, holding it out to her. "Jenkins kept it for me all those years. I'd like you to have it if you'll have me." Tears welled in Abigail's eyes as the full meaning of his gesture registered. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "For real," Vaughn nodded, a vulnerability in his eyes that she had never seen before. "I love you, Abigail. I think I have since the moment you hit that man over the head with a rock to save my life." A laugh escaped her through her tears. "That's a strange beginning for a love story." "Maybe," Vaughn agreed with a smile, "but it's our story, and I'd like to keep writing it together if you'll have me." "Yes," Abigail whispered, extending her trembling hand. "Yes, I'll have you." Vaughn slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her into his arms. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, but quickly deepened into something more urgent, years of loneliness and longing finding release in this moment of connection. When they finally parted, both breathless, Vaughn rested his forehead against hers. "I want to do this right," he murmured. "A proper wedding in town with witnesses and a minister." "I'd like that," Abigail agreed, her heart full to bursting, "though I don't have much in the way of a wedding dress." "We'll get you one," Vaughn promised, "the finest in Flagstaff." They set the date for 2 weeks hence, allowing time for the necessary preparations and for word to reach their scattered neighbors. The Hendersons were delighted by the news, Marjorie insisting on helping with the wedding supper and Thomas offering to drive Abigail to town in their best buggy. The intervening days passed in a blur of activity and happiness. True to his word, Vaughn took Abigail to Flagstaff's finest dressmaker, where she selected a pattern for a simple but elegant wedding dress of ivory silk. Though they maintained separate bedrooms until the wedding, their evenings were now filled with sweet kisses and whispered plans for their future together. So absorbed were they in their happiness that the threat of Blackstone receded to the back of their minds, not forgotten, but no longer dominating their every waking thought. Perhaps that was why they were unprepared when disaster struck, 3 days before the wedding. Abigail was alone at the ranch, Vaughn having ridden out to check on the cattle grazing in the north pasture. She was in the garden, harvesting tomatoes for that evening's supper, when she heard hoofbeats approaching rapidly. Her first thought was that Vaughn had returned early, but as she straightened up, wiping her hands on her apron, she realized there were too many horses for it to be just him. Heart racing, she hurried toward the house where the revolver Vaughn had given her was kept in a drawer by the door. She had barely reached the porch when 3 riders appeared around the bend in the drive. Blackstone and 2 of his men, different from those who had accompanied him on his previous visit. "Well, well," Blackstone called, dismounting with some difficulty due to his still healing shoulder. "All alone today, Miss Zander. How convenient." Abigail backed toward the door, her hand reaching behind her for the knob. "My fiancé will be back any minute," she warned, trying to keep her voice steady. Blackstone smiled coldly. "I doubt that. My men saw him riding north about an hour ago. He won't be back for some time." He gestured to his companions. "Search the house, find anything valuable, then burn it." Terror gripped Abigail as the men dismounted and started toward the house. She flung open the door and dashed inside, slamming it shut behind her and sliding the bolt into place. It wouldn't hold them for long, but it might buy her enough time to reach the revolver. She had just yanked open the drawer when the window beside the door shattered, glass exploding inward. One of Blackstone's men reached through the broken pane, fumbling for the bolt. Abigail grabbed the revolver, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. "Stay back," she shouted, raising the weapon as the door burst open, The man in the doorway hesitated at the sight of the gun, but Blackstone's voice came from behind him. "She won't shoot. She's too scared." Gathering all her courage, Abigail cocked the hammer as Vaughn had taught her. "You're wrong," she said, and pulled the trigger. The report was deafening in the small room. The man in the doorway howled, clutching his arm where her bullet had struck him. He stumbled backward, colliding with Blackstone. "Shoot her, you fools!" Blackstone shouted, shoving his injured man aside. Abigail fired again, the bullet going wild as she backed toward the bedroom. If she could reach the rifle Vaughn kept there, she'd have a better chance. But before she could get there, the second man was through the door, a pistol in his hand. Abigail fired again, her last bullet, and missed. The man grinned, raising his own weapon. A shot rang out, but not from the man's pistol. He collapsed forward, revealing Vaughn standing in the doorway behind him, rifle raised and face contorted with fury. "Blackstone!" he roared, stepping over the fallen man. But Blackstone was already running for his horse, dragging his wounded companion with him. Vaughn fired again, the bullet kicking up dirt at Blackstone's heels. "Abigail!" Vaughn rushed to her side, eyes wild with concern. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, unable to speak as reaction set in. Her legs gave way, and Vaughn caught her, cradling her against his chest as she began to sob. "I'm here," he murmured into her hair. "I'm here. You're safe now." When she had calmed enough to speak, Abigail told Vaughn what had happened: Blackstone's arrival, his order to burn the house, her desperate defense. "I heard the shots from the ridge," Vaughn explained. "Rode back as fast as I could." His arms tightened around her. "If anything had happened to you—" "But it didn't," Abigail reminded him, drawing strength from his presence. "I'm all right, and I think I wounded one of them." Vaughn's expression hardened. "This ends today," he said. "Blackstone won't stop until he's dead or in jail." He helped Abigail to a chair, then checked on the man who had fallen in their doorway. "He's alive," Vaughn reported, "but badly wounded." "What are you going to do?" Abigail asked. "First, I'm taking you to the Hendersons where you'll be safe. Then I'm going to Flagstaff for the sheriff." Vaughn's voice was calm but determined. "With a wounded man and evidence of Blackstone's attack on our home, even Sheriff Wilson can't ignore this." True to his word, Vaughn delivered Abigail to the Henderson ranch, leaving the wounded man tied up in their barn under Thomas's watchful eye. Marjorie clucked over Abigail like a mother hen, insisting she drink sweet tea with brandy to calm her nerves while they waited for Vaughn's return. Hours passed, the afternoon giving way to evening. Abigail paced the Hendersons' parlor, worry gnawing at her as the sky darkened with no sign of Vaughn. "He should have been back by now," she fretted. "Something's wrong." "The sheriff probably had questions," Thomas reassured her. "These things take time." But Abigail couldn't shake the feeling that Vaughn was in danger. When Thomas stepped outside to check on their prisoner, she made a decision. "Mrs. Henderson," she said, turning to the older woman, "I need to borrow a horse." Marjorie's eyes widened. "You can't be thinking of going after them. It's too dangerous." "Vaughn is out there somewhere," Abigail insisted, "and he might need help. I can't just sit here waiting." Despite Marjorie's protests, Abigail was determined. When Thomas returned, she presented her case so forcefully that he finally agreed to accompany her to town, though he insisted on driving the wagon rather than riding horseback. They had just reached the main road when they saw riders approaching Vaughn, Sheriff Wilson, and two deputies. Relief flooded through Abigail at the sight of Vaughn, whole and unharmed. "What are you doing out here?" he demanded when they met, his relief at seeing her safe quickly giving way to concern. "Looking for you," Abigail replied simply. "You were gone so long I was worried." The hard line of Vaughn's mouth softened. "I'm sorry. It took time to convince the sheriff to act." Sheriff Wilson nodded grimly. "Adler here can be mighty persuasive when he sets his mind to it. Where's the wounded man?" "In our barn," Thomas replied. "What about Blackstone?" "We're going after him now," the sheriff said. "Got a pretty good idea where he's holed up, based on what Adler's told me and reports from around the territory." Vaughn turned to Abigail. "I want you to go back to the Hendersons and stay there until this is over." But Abigail shook her head firmly. "No, I'm coming with you." "Abigail, this is my fight too, Vaughn," she insisted. "Blackstone tried to buy me like property, threatened me, attacked our home. I deserve to see him brought to justice." Vaughn looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Abigail's expression must have convinced him of her determination. "All right," he conceded. "But you stay with the wagon, well back from any fighting." The sheriff raised an eyebrow but made no comment on this domestic negotiation. "Let's collect our prisoner and move out," he said. "I want to reach Blackstone's hideout before dawn." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. The wounded man, still semi-conscious, was loaded into the wagon. Thomas Henderson agreed to drive, with Abigail seated beside him. Vaughn, the sheriff, and the deputies rode ahead, following a trail that led into the rugged country north of Flagstaff. As promised, when they neared their destination, a remote cabin where Blackstone was reportedly hiding the wagon stopped at a safe distance. Vaughn came to Abigail's side. "Stay here," he said firmly. "No matter what you hear." Abigail caught his hand. "Be careful." "I will." He leaned down from his saddle and kissed her briefly but fiercely. "I've got too much to live for now." She watched as he rode away with the lawman, disappearing into the pre-dawn darkness. Time crawled by, each minute stretching into what felt like hours as she and Thomas waited in tense silence. And then the shooting started, multiple guns firing in rapid succession. Shouted commands, a cry of pain that might have been Vaughn or might have been someone else. Abigail gripped the edge of the wagon seat so hard her knuckles turned white. "I can't just sit here," she whispered. Thomas laid a restraining hand on her arm. "There's nothing we can do, Miss Abigail. We'd only be in the way." Another volley of gunfire and then silence. The waiting was unbearable. Just as Abigail was about to jump down from the wagon, consequences be damned, riders emerged from the trees, the sheriff and his deputies, and behind them Vaughn, leading a riderless horse. Abigail's heart stopped until she realized Vaughn was upright in his saddle, apparently uninjured. As they drew closer, she could see that the sheriff was supporting a wounded deputy, while the second deputy had a bound prisoner, Blackstone himself, his face bloody but his expression still defiant. "It's over," Vaughn announced as they reached the wagon. "Blackstone's man is dead. He tried to ambush us from behind." The sheriff nodded grimly. "Blackstone will hang for murder once we get back to Flagstaff. The territorial judge is due next week." Abigail looked at the man who had caused them so much fear and suffering. He stared back at her with undimmed hatred in his eyes. "You haven't won," Blackstone spat. "You'll never be free of me." "Even if they hang me, my associates will—" "Shut your mouth," the sheriff interrupted, gesturing for his deputy to move Blackstone away. To Vaughn and Abigail he added, "Don't pay him any mind. His type always makes threats when they're beaten." As they made the long journey back to Flagstaff, Abigail rode double with Vaughn, her arms around his waist, her cheek pressed against his back. The nightmare that had begun with her father's debts was finally ending. Blackstone would face justice for his crimes, and she and Vaughn could begin their life together without the shadow of his threats hanging over them. 3 days later, in the small church in Flagstaff, Abigail stood beside Vaughn as they exchanged their vows before God and the community that had become their own. She wore the ivory silk dress they had ordered before Blackstone's attack, now hastily altered by the dressmaker to be ready in time. Vaughn wore a new suit, his usual weathered hat replaced by a clean one for the occasion. The church was filled with well-wishers, the Hendersons, Sheriff Wilson and his wife, other ranchers from the area and townspeople who had heard the dramatic story of Blackstone's capture. Even Miss Holloway, the schoolmistress who might have been Abigail's employer in another life, attended, offering sincere congratulations after the ceremony. "You make a handsome couple," she told them. "And if you ever decide teaching is your calling after all, Mrs. Adler, my door is always open." Abigail thanked her, though she knew her path now lay with Vaughn and the ranch they would build together. As they drove home in the wagon, now husband and wife in truth as well as name, Vaughn turned to her with a smile that transformed his usually serious face. "Happy?" he asked, taking her hand in his. "More than I ever thought possible," Abigail replied honestly. "A year ago I couldn't have imagined any of this." Vaughn's expression grew thoughtful. "It's strange how life works. If your father hadn't sold you, if I hadn't been there that day with money in my pocket, we might never have met," Abigail finished for him. "Exactly." He squeezed her hand. "I'm not glad for what you suffered, Abigail, but I'm grateful for where it led us." As they crested the final hill and their ranch came into view, Abigail felt a surge of pride and belonging. This place that had once been strange to her was now home in every sense of the word. And the man beside her, once a mysterious stranger who had bought her freedom, was now the center of her world. "What shall we do first, Mrs. Adler?" Vaughn asked as they pulled up in front of their house. "There's still daylight left." Abigail smiled, leaning into his side. "I think, Mr. Adler, that can wait until tomorrow. Today is for celebrating." Vaughn's eyes darkened with understanding and desire. Without another word, he lifted her from the wagon and carried her across the threshold of their home. Autumn came to the high country, painting the aspen groves in gold and crimson. The Jenkins Ranch, now the Adler Ranch, had prospered through the summer months. The small herd of cattle had grown with the purchase of additional stock. The house had been improved with new furnishings and a fresh coat of paint. The garden had yielded a bountiful harvest, much of which Abigail had preserved for the winter ahead. But the greatest blessing of all arrived on a crisp October morning, their firstborn child, a son they named James Thomas Adler, after Jenkins and their friend Thomas Henderson. "He has your eyes," Abigail whispered, cradling the infant as Vaughn sat beside her on their bed, his arm around her shoulders, his expression one of wonder and fierce pride. "And your spirit, I think," Vaughn replied, gently touching the downy head. "Look at how he fights against the swaddling." Abigail laughed softly. "A determined soul, like his father." As winter settled over the ranch, bringing short days and long, cozy evenings by the fire, Abigail often reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this life. From the auction block in Springerville to the warmth of her own home, with a husband who cherished her and a child who represented their shared future, it was a transformation she could never have foreseen. One night, as snow fell gently outside and James slept peacefully in his cradle, Vaughn put into words what she had been feeling. "I bought your freedom that day," he said, his arm around her as they sat before the hearth, "but you've given me mine in return." Abigail looked up at him questioningly. "I was drifting before I met you," Vaughn explained. "Even with my dream of reclaiming this ranch, something was missing. I didn't realize it until you came into my life." "And what was that?" Abigail asked, though she thought she knew the answer. Vaughn pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "A heart to match my own," he said simply. "Someone to build a life with, to make this house a home." As the fire crackled and the wind sang around the eaves of their snug house, Abigail settled deeper into her husband's embrace. Outside, the world might be harsh and unpredictable, full of men like Blackstone who saw others as possessions to be bought and sold. But here, within these walls, she and Vaughn had created something precious and rare, a partnership of equals, bound by love rather than ownership. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. Spending all that money to free a stranger, Vaughn's answer was immediate and certain. "Not for a single moment. It was the best $1,000 I ever spent." Abigail smiled, her hand finding his. "And to think all this began with an auction." "No," Vaughn corrected gently. "All this began with a choice to see a person's worth beyond a price tag. Everything good in our lives grew from that moment." As James stirred in his cradle, making the small mewling sounds that preceded waking, Abigail rose to tend to him. Lifting her son into her arms, she carried him back to the fireside where Vaughn waited, his face softened with love for both of them. This, she thought, was true freedom, not merely the absence of chains, but the presence of love, of purpose, of belonging. And for that freedom, she would be eternally grateful to the quiet cowboy who had outbid everyone and set her heart free.